The way that I was raised growing up was I was read the lives of the saints instead of like fairy tales or Aesop's fables or I don't know, whatever normal kids read growing up. One of those stories was the life of Saint Dominic de Guzman, whose story is also the origin story for the Rosary, a prayer that my family prayed every day in my house since as long as I can remember. In today's video, I want to talk about the origin of the Rosary and how the open secret about the origin of the Rosary is kind of embarrassing for the Catholic Church. And I'll also touch on any broader implications that it might have as well. Let's begin. If we wanted to learn about the Rosary, I feel like a good place to start is the holyrosary.org/rosary history. Since the Rosary is composed principally and in substance of the prayer of Christ and the angelic salutation, that is, the Our Father and the Hail Mary, it is without doubt the first prayer and the principal devotion of the faithful, and has been in use all throughout the centuries, from the time of the apostles and disciples down to the present. It was only in the year 1214, however, that the Church received the Rosary in its present form, and according to the method we use today. It was given to the Church by Saint Dominic, who had received it from the Blessed Virgin as a means of converting the Albigensians and other sinners. I will tell you the story of how he received it, which is found in the very well-known book De Dignitate Saltari by Blessed Alain de la Roche. Saint Dominic, seeing that the gravity of people's sins was hindering the conversion of the Albigensians, withdrew into a forest near Toulouse, where he prayed continuously for 3 days and 3 nights. During this time, he did nothing but weep and do harsh penances in order to appease the anger of God. He used his discipline so much that his body was lacerated, and finally he fell into a coma. At this point, Our Lady appeared to him, accompanied by 3 angels, and she said, "Dear Dominic, do you know which weapon the Blessed Trinity wants to use to reform the world?" "Oh, my lady," answered Saint Dominic, "you know far better than I do, because next to your Son, Jesus Christ, you have always been the chief instrument of our salvation." Then Our Lady replied, "I want you to know that, in this kind of warfare, the principal weapon has always been the angelic psalter, which is the foundation stone of the New Testament. Therefore, if you want to reach these hardened souls and win them over to God, preach my psalter." So he arose, comforted, and burning with zeal for the conversion of the people in that district, he made straight for the cathedral. At once, unseen angels rang the bells to gather the people together, and St. Dominic began to preach. At the very beginning of his sermon, an appalling storm broke out, the earth shook, the sun was darkened, and there was so much thunder and lightning that all were very much afraid. Even greater was their fear when, looking at a picture of Our Lady exposed in a prominent place, they saw her raise her arms to heaven 3 times to call down God's vengeance upon them if they failed to be converted, to amend their lives and seek the protection of the Holy Mother of God. God wished, by means of these supernatural phenomena, to spread the new devotion of the Holy Rosary and to make it more widely known. At last, at the prayer of St. Dominic, the storm came to an end, and he went on preaching. So fervently and compellingly did he explain the importance and value of the Rosary that almost all of the Toulouse embraced it and renounced their false beliefs. In a very short time, a great improvement was seen in the town. People began leading Christian lives and gave up their former bad habits. Inspired by the Holy Spirit, instructed by the Blessed Virgin, as well as by his own experience, St. Dominic preached the Rosary for the rest of his life. He preached it by his example, as well as by his sermons in cities and in country places, to people of high station and low, before scholars and the uneducated, to Catholics and to heretics. The story goes on, but I think that's enough for now. And what's funny is that we have to get to the end of the statement of the history of the Rosary, and it just says, by St. Louis de Montfort, the 18th century priest and poet. Cool. So we know that St. Louis de Montfort was a fan, but we also know that he was not alone in his praise for the Rosary and spreading the tale of the Rosary's origin. Pope Leo XIII wrote as if this origin story was indeed a historical event. In Pope Leo XIII's 1883 SUPREMI APOSTOLATUS OFFICIO, he said the following: Our merciful God, as you know, raised up against these most direful enemies, referring here to the Albigensian Heretics, a most holy man, the illustrious parent and founder of the Dominican order, great in the integrity of his doctrine, in his example of virtue, and by his apostolic labors, he proceeded undauntedly to attack the enemies of the church, not by force of arms, but trusting wholly to that devotion which he was the first to institute under the name of the Holy Rosary, which was disseminated through the length and breadth of the earth by him and his pupils. Guided, in fact, by divine inspiration and grace, he foresaw that this devotion, like a most powerful warlike weapon, would be the means of putting the enemy to flight, and of confounding their audacity and mad impiety. Such was indeed its result. Thanks to this new method of prayer, when adopted and properly carried out as instituted by the Holy Father St. Dominic, piety, faith, and union began to return, and the projects and devices of the heretics to fall to pieces. Many wanderers also returned to the way of salvation, and the wrath of the impious was restrained by the arms of those Catholics who had determined to repel their violence. And then a little bit further down in this section, Pope Leo XIII quotes Pope Gregory XIII, saying, Pope Gregory XIII, in his turn, pronounced that, quote, the Rosary had been instituted by St. Dominic to appease the anger of God and to implore the intercession of the Blessed Virgin Mary. Then in the 1889 encyclical DIUTURNI Temporis, Pope Leo XIII writes that the origin of this form of prayer is divine rather than human, showing it to be an admirable garland wove from the angelic salutation together with the Lord's Prayer, joined to meditation, so on and so forth. But this form is divine rather than human. So there you have it, right? Pope Leo XIII believed that the Rosary was handed directly to St. Dominic by Our Lady in the 13th century. St. Louis de Montfort believed the same thing, right? So if it's good enough for popes and if it's good enough for saints, then it's good enough for me, right? No need to look into the historicity of this one, right? Right? Well, seeing as how I've been on this Marian apparition kick for a long time now, we may as well look into the historicity of Our Lady of the Rosary too. Earlier in this video, I called the shaky historicity of the Rosary origin an open secret. For the record, the word secret, I think, still does apply here. I never heard anything other than the origin story that we just heard when I was growing up, and I don't think that you'll really ever hear a sermon about the stuff that I am about to share with you. However, if you go looking for these details, they are not hard to find. You will find them with like any quick Google search. I mean, like Wikipedia summarizes what I'm about to share with you, like right on the Wikipedia page for the Rosary. So it is an open secret. It's a secret as in nobody talks about it, but it's open because the information is not hard to find. Let's go to the Catholic Encyclopedia. The Catholic Encyclopedia entry on the Rosary says the following. When the Albigensian heresy was devastating the country of Toulouse, St. Dominic earnestly besought the help of Our Lady, and was instructed by her, so tradition asserts, to preach the Rosary among the people as an antidote to heresy and sin. That many popes have spoken so is undoubtedly true, and amongst the rest, we have a series of encyclicals beginning in 1883, issued by Pope Leo XIII, which, while commending this devotion to the faithful in the most earnest terms, assumes the institution of the Rosary by St. Dominic to be factually established. We will confine ourselves here to the controverted question. The controverted question, you see that right here, of its history, a matter which both in the middle of the 18th century and again in recent years has attracted much attention. So even just in this first paragraph, we see that the history of the Rosary is controverted when the Catholic Encyclopedia presents the traditional story. And then it adds the phrase, so tradition asserts. Then there are several paragraphs of non-controversial information about the Rosary. But then the Catholic Encyclopedia does admit, in any case, it is certain that in the course of the 12th century, and before the birth of St. Dominic, the practice of reciting 50 or 150 Ave Marias had become generally familiar. So it was common to say 50 or 150 Hail Marys before St. Dominic was born, and meditating on the mysteries wasn't part of the rosary until long after St. Dominic was dead. The introduction of this meditation during the recitation of the Aves was rightly attributed to a certain Carthusian, Dominic the Prussian. It is in any case certain that at the close of the 15th century, the utmost possible variety of methods of meditating prevailed, and that the 15 mysteries now generally accepted were not uniformly adhered to, even by the Dominicans themselves. To sum up, we have positive evidence that both the invention of the beads as a counting apparatus and also the practice of repeating 150 Aves cannot be due to St. Dominic because they are both notably older than his time. Further, we are assured that the meditating upon the mysteries was not introduced until 200 years after his death. What then, we are compelled to ask, is there left of which St. Dominic may be called the author? These positive reasons for distrusting the current tradition might, in a measure, be ignored as archaeological refinements if there were any satisfactory evidence to show that St. Dominic had identified himself with the pre-existing rosary and became its apostle. But here we are met with absolute silence. Of the 8 or 9 early lives of the saints, not one makes the faintest allusion to the rosary. We possess hundreds, even thousands of manuscripts containing devotional treatises, sermons, chronicles, saints' lives, etc., written by the friar preachers between 1220 and 1450. But no single verifiable passage has yet been produced which speaks of the rosary as instituted by St. Dominic, or which even makes much of the devotion as one specifically dear to his children. Impressed by this conspiracy of silence, the Bollandists, a collection of Catholic hagiographers, so they wrote Lives of the Saints, the Bollandists, on trying to trace to its source the origin of the current tradition, found that all of the clues converged upon one point: the preaching of the Dominican Alain de la Roupe about the years 1470 to 1475. He, it undoubtedly was, who first suggested the idea that the devotion of Our Lady's Psalter, 150 Hail Marys, was instituted or revived by St. Dominic. Alain was very earnest and devout, but, as the highest authorities admit, he was full of delusions and based his revelations on the imaginary testimony of writers that never existed. The Encyclopedia goes on to admit that back in the time when it was commonly believed that the traditional origin story for the rosary was true, that there were several documents that were circulating as proof that Our Lady really did appear to St. Dominic and really did give him the rosary. But those documents have problems. Let's read about that here. So, two considerations strongly support the view of the rosary tradition just expounded. So there are considerations that strongly support the view that the rosary did not originate with St. Dominic. And that would be the surrender of almost every notable piece that has at one time or another been relied upon to vindicate the supposed claims of St. Dominic. Memoirs have long ago been proven to be a forgery. The famous will of Anthony Surs, which professed to leave a bequest for the Confraternity of the Rosary in 1221, was put forward as a conclusive piece of testimony for the truth of this origin story for the Rosary, but that is now admitted by Dominican authorities to be a forgery, and it's been admitted to be a forgery since 1901. Similarly, a supposed reference to the subject by Thomas A. Kempis in the Chronicle of Mount St. Agnes is a pure blunder, something else that's been known since 1901. And look, none of this is new information. One of the two main sources that the Catholic Encyclopedia cites is Scriptores Ordinis Praedicatorum. I probably said that wrong, which was published in 1721. It is available in full from the Internet Archive, but unfortunately it is a scan of a text in Latin, meaning it's not searchable. So that makes reading it pretty tough unless you're fluent in Latin, and it's like a grainy scan at that. My Latin is very rusty, but if there's someone who wants to like fact check the Catholic Encyclopedia, be my guest. And apparently, in well-educated Catholic circles, such as my buddy Kyle Whittington's Discord server, this is common knowledge that the origin of the Rosary is a myth. When I asked the Catholics in Kyle's Discord server, like, did you guys grow up hearing this story? They said no. They said, like, wow, Kevin, I can't believe you actually grew up, like, learning that. But if this information is so public, and if the well-educated Catholics are all already on board with all of this and they kind of just don't care, then how is it that I grew up the way that I did? And why is this secretive at all? Well, I guess I could blame some of the fact that I grew up hearing this story on the fact that like the internet wasn't in any of our homes back then. And while that is true, and while that probably has something to do with it, there's more to it than just that. Let me show you what I mean.
Well, this particular priest, we'll call him Father Dominic at that point, he went on a preaching campaign to go against them. And
them referring to the Albigensian Heretics again.
He thought with his ability to speak, he'd be able to conquer them easily. But he wasn't able to. And he was pretty bummed out. So he went into the forest to do like a retreat in southern France. And he prayed and he asked heaven, I need help, I need help. And that is when tradition says, popes have said, Our Lady came to him and said to him, preach my Psalter.
Did you catch that? Tradition says, probably referring to that sermon from St. Louis de Montfort, and popes have said, I assume referencing all the encyclicals from Pope Leo XIII, as well as the work done under Pope Gregory XIII. Does the priest here, Father Calloway, does he go on to say later in this speech that the story is recognized as myth today and that we have really good reasons to think that none of these things really happened? No. I recommend that you watch Father's sermon. It is linked in the description down below. It is an hour long. The first 20 or so minutes will cover most of the context that you will need, but not all of it. Later in the sermon, Father does go into like the Battle of Lepanto and stuff. The Battle of Lepanto is a topic for another video. Maybe I should make one on the Battle of Lepanto. But Father's point was very much so that we should believe the origin story of the scapular. You can see that at the roughly 15-minute and 48-second mark. Father starts talking more about why it is that we should believe it, and like maybe I guess why we shouldn't believe the people who say that we shouldn't believe it. Listen here.
The Black Plague in Europe in the 14th century was a result of Satan seeking to get rid of this. The weapon had been unsheathed. He wanted to destroy all documentary evidence associated with it. And by the way,
did you hear that? Satan sent the Black Plague to Europe to try to get rid of the Rosary, and he wanted to destroy all documentary evidence associated with the Rosary. And
this is a frequent tactic of the evil one. When some new form of devotion is given to the world, he will seek to burn the original documents.
Isn't that convenient? When a new devotion comes out, if there are origin documents that support the mythos around the origin, then great, we have the origin documents. But if we don't have the origin documents, well, that's because Satan was doing his best to destroy all of the evidence of these origin documents. That's right, Satan himself sent the Black Plague to Europe to eliminate or erase all the primary sources on the scapular. Come on, Father. It's really hard to take this seriously. Let Father keep talking here as well.
After that happened, in 1903, Leo XIII dies, modernism strikes hard.
Yep, that's that, late 1800s modernism, yep.
Oh, big time hard.
Big time
and
hard.
where do they go on the attack again? This. As soon as Leo XIII died, the scholars come out and they start saying, it's legendary, it's not true, it has no foundation in reality, there's no historical documents. Right, because they were burned. What does it take to get into your head?
What does it take to get into your head? Satan is trying to hide all the documents of the origin of the Rosary. It's kind of ridiculous, isn't it? I mean, this is what Father is saying. Don't listen to anyone who disagrees with what I say, because everyone who disagrees with me is being tricked by Satan. See, this is how pious lies start to spread. There is pressure to believe anything and everything that pious folks around you believe, right? And then there's this like piety arms race to start believing like more and more stuff, and you're never really allowed to stop and question, because questioning such pious beliefs it's obviously from the devil, right? The devil is trying to get you to question these pious beliefs, so you shouldn't even be allowed to question those beliefs. It's a piety arms race, and it happens it happened in the trad chapel that I grew up in, and I wouldn't be surprised if there were piety arms races in every insular society of religious folks. That I can only speak to the trad experience, but I imagine that this kind of arms race that we are watching happen on the screen now is something that I doubt it's restricted to trad communities only. Now, my listeners may remember a word in the Catholic Encyclopedia article on the Rosary that we looked at earlier, and that word was Bollandists. The Bollandists were the hagiographers. They kept records and they collated records about the lives of the saints. They've been around for hundreds of years. The Bollandists were the ones, according to the Catholic Encyclopedia, to acknowledge that the Rosary origin story was a myth. Let's hear what Father Calloway has to say about the Bollandists.
Some of this, Satan got a hold on even some people in the church. I hate to be the one to say this. Jesuits.
Shocker, right? It's always the Jesuits. And I forgot to mention that the original Bollandists were Jesuits. Today, they're, and even historically, they haven't been restricted to only the Jesuits, but the founders of the Bollandists were indeed Jesuits.
There was a group that was formed called the Bollandists, and they were good. They were supposed to be studying the lives of the saints and putting them into books and cataloging all this stuff so that it was accurate and true, and that's good and noble. But they got jealous that it was the Dominicans who were given this. And the church only allowed images of this to be shown with St. Dominic. Nobody else at that time.
So, yeah, the whole reason why the Bollandists were trying to suppress the truth or whatever is because they were jealous. They wanted, they wanted the Jesuits to be the ones associated with all the pious devotions, not the Dominicans. They were jealous, and Father doubles down.
Images that people tried to paint that actually showed St. Francis being given the rosary from Our Lady, and they were condemned. Images with St. Ignatius of Loyola, same thing, condemned. Why? Because that's not the pious tradition. Had they been shown giving the Franciscan corona, fine, but not the Dominican rosary. So these Bollandists got jealous, and they started to attack this tradition and say it's legendary, it's not true.
I sometimes get myself in hot water because I say that the Catholic Church has a streak of anti-intellectualism that is just very deeply ingrained. I don't always think that the converts see it, but if you were raised in it like me, I think, well, not all of the people who were raised like me, but if you were raised like me, you might be able to see it a little bit more. Father Calloway is expressing clear anti-intellectualism in his speech at Franciscan University here, to claim that you are right, and anyone who disagrees with you and disagrees with your position is doing so just because they're jealous, or because Satan is using them as a tool against the pious people. That's anti-intellectualism. And if you think that his insistence that something that has been deemed a myth by virtually all experts in the area isn't anti-intellectual enough, let me play you one more clip.
Actually, it's probably better to fly in there because it's extreme South Colombia, like right on the border of Ecuador. I want to go there so bad. Fully approved. John Paul.
And here he's talking about the apparition of Our Lady of Las Lajas. He wants to. He hasn't been to the shrine. He wants to fly there to see it. It is fully approved.
Who talked about it? That happened in 1754 to confound the academics. You think?
That's right. The academics are, evil people who are impious and who are they're being used as tools of Satan to distract the pious folks, the academics. And just listen to how he talks about the academics.
Think you know? You don't know. When you get too involved in your books and you don't have the piety and the devotion and you're not trusting, there's a problem, and heaven will respond. Wow.
Let me read that to you. When you get too involved in your books and you don't have the piety and the devotion and you're not trusting, there's a problem. Father is here saying that piety and devotion are more important than getting too involved in your books. That's right. Never let any facts get in the way of your feelings, as long as your feelings are pious and that they were shared by people in the distant enough past. And, the facts that we have learned since those people in the past, those facts are like straw in the wind compared to the tradition of people having the same pious feelings that I have. This is clear anti-intellectualism on display. So, what are the implications of all this? As convenient for folks who would love to use this to prove that the papacy is false or something, like as convenient as that would be, I don't think that really works here. Pope Leo XIII was mistaken about the origins of the Rosary, and he wrote about his mistaken belief in the origin of the Rosary in a couple encyclicals. Okay. Catholics, by and large, aren't going to tell you that papal encyclicals will be free from historical errors. So Pope Leo XIII was wrong about history. Okay, no sweat off the backs of any Catholics, really. But there is one implication that occurred to me as I was considering all of this data. Saint Dominic de Guzman died in 1221. The Dominican friar Alan de Rupe, from which the origin myth of the Rosary originated, fabricated that story around the year 1470. So within 250 years, stories of a real historical figure came about which had nothing to do with the real historical person. And these stories were common belief for the next couple hundred years and are still common today in plenty of Catholic circles, like the one in which I grew up. If this could happen in the 15th century, that, a story from the 12th century was entirely like fabricated, even though the person was real. If that could happen in the 15th century, which was notably after the printing press had been established in Europe, so you would think that the information flow would be better and information would flow more freely. Why couldn't this have happened earlier? Why couldn't stories have been made up after the fact about, for instance, Our Lady of Guadalupe? I mean, I think that's what happened. I don't think that Saint Juan Diego existed as a real historical person. Why couldn't it have happened with, earlier lives of the saints? I mean, evidently it did, right? The church actually demoted a couple of saints in the martyrology, and demoted is maybe loaded language, but there are saints that most Catholic scholars would admit to you never existed. And granted, these were people who were never truly canonized because the canonization process didn't even really become a thing until the year 1170. So, there's a lot of leeway there, but why couldn't have something like this happen in the first century ancient Near East? I think it could have. And if it could have, then how should we adjust our standards when we're looking at historical documents? Well, I mean, I think a pretty good barometer is does this stuff break the laws of physics, right? A woman who died in the first century, right, in the ancient Near East, appearing to and speaking to people in the 13th century in Europe, does indeed seem to break the laws of physics, right? So apparitions of Our Lady, maybe we should be skeptical of those. Stories about a religious leader on a flying horse splitting the moon in half, right? we should probably be skeptical of those because that also seems to break the laws of physics. Somebody rising from the dead seems to break the laws of physics. So maybe we should be skeptical about that as well. This kind of skepticism, the skepticism of the supernatural, appears to serve us pretty well whenever we actually have enough documents to verify what happened. That kind of skepticism serves us well with regards to Our Lady of the Rosary. But if we evenly applied this kind of skepticism, what other kind of religious beliefs would we all wind up rejecting? Thanks for watching. All right, it's been a minute since I've done a postscript, so here's a postscript. This is the one thing in the speech from Father Callahan at Franciscan that I wanted to include in the script, but I really couldn't fit it anywhere into the script. Like, it didn't really make sense anywhere. So I'm going to play this clip, and then I'm just going to talk about it for 1 second.
Prepare to get your mind blown right now, okay? You know about the tilma in Guadalupe, and it's a miracle. I mean, that tilma is alive. You know, they've studied the eyes and everything. It's a miraculous. It should have disintegrated. The color spectrum is not known to us. It's hovering above the fabric. It's unbelievable.
I guess I shouldn't be surprised here in a talk about how we shouldn't trust the academics for Father Callahan to start talking about how the tilma is alive and there's a reflection in the ink blots in the eyes. And it should have disintegrated, and the color spectrum is not known to us. Whatever that means, it's hovering above the fabric. None of that stuff is true. All of that stuff is pretty easy to find the data on, and the data does not support any of this stuff. But I guess I'm not surprised because I guess Father Callahan doesn't get too involved in the books, right? I bet you Father Callahan doesn't let facts get in the way of his pious traditions. So I just kind of thought that was a funny clip. I thought it tied in vaguely, and I wanted to talk about it. It didn't fit in the script, so you guys got it in the postscript. These claims about the tilma fall apart under even a cursory look at the data. And I have 2 videos on Our Lady of Guadalupe if you guys are interested in seeing those. Anyway, I just wanted to share that final segment of the video that I couldn't really fit anywhere else in the script. Thanks for hanging out with me for a little while longer. And if you're not already subscribed and you hung out all the way to the postscript, then subscribe. And thanks again, and we'll talk more soon.